Hi, everyone. Welcome to New Kinship. We're happy to be with you for another episode. Today, we have a great guest who was recommended to me strongly by some mutual friends, and he is Ron. And Ron, you are welcome here. We're so glad you can talk with us.
Yeah, actually, I'm the one who's honored. I listen to you guys
Thank
all
you.
the time, so this is an utter pleasure
Yeah,
for
we're
me.
so happy you're here. We're so happy to talk with you more.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining indeed. So, Ron, he was recommended to me because, as we were kind of thinking about before this episode started recording, the side B movement or the side B school of thought leans on the younger end. Like I'm in my 30s and I'm often like in the older range of things because I don't know 20-year-olds kind of. But then Ron is, I think, in your 60s. Is that right? Yep.
Oh, yeah. On the other half of the 60s, too. On the other side.
So he's one of our elders, our de facto elders, and we appreciate that. Honor him for his eldership in this regard. And yeah, that's one reason we want to get more voices to talk about what it's like to live a side B life, kind of towards 60s, 50s, and kind of older. Additionally, I was also recommended to talk with you because we've been engaging more and more people who have been moving between the sides over time. And you were someone who was recommended to me as someone who's had an interesting trajectory in your Christian life of discipleship related to the different sides. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
it hasn't been boring. It's been boring.
Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And that could include where you're from, the important people in your life, what you care about, kind of what your life entails these days. Many things. What kind of Christian you are. And also, I guess it's probably good to talk about any sexual identity terms you might use. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm born and raised in New Jersey, which means I eat copious amounts of pizza, way too much. I go by he, him, and definitely go by gay or same-sex attracted. But I was raised in the church in your typical Christian home way back. Actually, maybe it wasn't typical, but a Christian home. Yeah, I'm currently back with the PCA Church, which has its own, as you guys know, has its own issues with divorce, but it's inside beats. But that has been an interesting, fun kind of ride, though, too. But just so you guys know, like, I've been same-sex attracted as far as I could remember when I was a little kid. I always was attracted to guys or boys instead of girls. And you know what? Being raised in the church, too, like, you always knew that was wrong, because unfortunately, especially back in the 60s in the evangelical church, I was raised in the evangelical street church and also the Brethren church. So singleness was not really an option growing up, as a vocation. Like it was always going to be marriage or nothing, but that wasn't the case for me. But I mean, when I was dealing with my stuff as a little kid, I remember, like, I'd fall asleep at night. People won't even understand this, but you don't remember, but we had transistor radios. They were like these battery AM radios. And I would listen to these preachers on the radio, and they'd say, like, lay your hands on this radio and we can heal you of anything. God could heal you from any disease. So, oh my gosh, as a little kid, like, I'm laying my hands on these radios. Right. Please, God, take these, attractions away from me. I want to like girls instead of guys. But needless to say, that didn't happen. So, like, literally, I was in Sunday school in the 1970s, early 70s. But when I was in high school, we got like a new Sunday school book, which was very interesting. Because instead of like the Old Testament stories, we had like chapters on sex, chapter on abortion, and then we had a chapter on masturbation and a chapter on homosexuality. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like I can't believe my little dinky church is going to address, at least two issues like I have in my life, growing up, as a teenager. But we did like the abortion chapter, no problem, because none of us were having sex. Did the other chapters, no problem. We get to the masturbation chapter, or called the M chapter, and we skip it like it didn't exist. And so I'm like, okay, insecure people are when you're 13, that didn't help my insecurity. And then we get to like the homosexual chapter, and we skip that too. And I'm like, what did you do, like, as a 13-year-old? Like, raise your hand in Sunday school, say, oh, Sunday school teacher, we skipped the, eighth chapter. Like, that's not going to happen.
Asking for a friend.
Yes, yes. That wasn't even a term back then. I wish it was. I could have used it. Yeah, so, like, literally, I thought I was the only one, like, in Christendom, like, at that age, dealing with this stuff. But kind of weird, fast forward, like, many decades, in that small, like, actually youth group connected with that church, literally 2 people in that youth group died of AIDS, and 3 people came out and left the faith. And so, like, I'm a big proponent of, like, don't always assume just because you grew up in a nice little Christian environment and in a Christian church that the students aren't going through things that you don't know about. So, yeah, so that's kind of one of my heart issues. I don't know if I address it very well in my personal life, but that's important to me. But literally, I went to college, total I hate the word secular, but we'll just say secular university. And I was still dealing with my same-sex attractions. And I remember just one day, this is going to sound really dated, but we used to have Disco Wednesdays at school where, like, the music industry was in New York at the time. And so I went to school just right across the river in Jersey. So they would actually send all their artists and try out their records for whatever they wanted to hit the club scene with and see how it reverberated. And I still remember, like, there's Gloria Gaynor belting out I Will Survive for the first time. And I looked across the room and there were, like, guys dancing with girls, but then there was this group of guys dancing with guys. And I just got, like, this instant rush. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is kind of where I want to be. So soon after that, I applied for a job next to the school and had to take a math test for the job. And, like, I am the worst at math. So I'm taking this test, and as I'm taking a test, I look up, and literally the most beautiful boy I've ever seen in my life is, like, walking by me with, like, a roll of files, and, like, forgot totally about the math. I couldn't concentrate, failed the math test. I was so embarrassed. But they hired me anyway and stuck me in the same department as this kid. And well, let's say we became best friends, and then after time, we became more than friends. We became lifelong partners. And at that time, like, literally, I totally walked away from my faith, totally walked away from the church. Like, literally, like, my college years, we were too involved in the New York nightlife, like, at the time. So even if I wanted to go to church, there was no way I would be waking up at that time for church. So that's just not the way it was happening. But we had a pretty sweet life. Like, I thought, we had it good, like, nothing better than 2 incomes coming in from, like, 2 single guys, actually right after college. And then we were both at the time social writers for an Asian newspaper. And they, like, would fly us all over the world just to go to parties and write about them. And I'm thinking, this is great. Nothing beats this. And even one time, there was, like, a photo exhibit on Fifth Avenue, and it was, like, the most influential New Yorkers of, I think, 1980 or something. And I never forget, there's, like, this huge portrait of Ivana Trump, the original, And then there's, like, a huge portrait of my partner, and then a huge portrait of me. And I'm thinking, okay, life doesn't get any better than this. It's a pretty cool scenario. But fast forward a little bit, it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and my partner wakes me up out of bed, and he says, oh, Ron, you got to take me to the hospital. I can't breathe. Now, I didn't think too much of it at the time because he had asthma pretty bad, so I just figured it was an asthma kick. But that hospital stay literally lasted 3 months. And in that stay, I walked in right when his physician was telling him that he not only had AIDS, but he had full-blown end-stage AIDS. And I'm like, oh man, like, my entire world view came crashing down very quickly. I thought I was going to faint, actually. I thought it was like watching a cartoon character. This was not my reality. But a funny thing happens with the Holy Spirit, So I get home that night, and I never felt the presence of God so much in my
Mm.
entire life. So literally, I spent all night on my living room floor, just, confessing my sins, praising God. And Romans 8, 38, 39 came flooding back, probably like the only memory verse I could remember. But like basically nothing can separate us from the love of God. So I knew at that point, no matter how far I strayed from Jesus and the faith, that he never strayed from me.
Amen.
And yeah, so it was a rough next 18 months. Literally, I had to become a full time
Mm.
caregiver. And because back then, there wasn't any drugs either. All the drugs were experimental for AIDS, which I'm like really envious of people. I assume you even use the word envious. I am glad that people have much better drugs now. But literally, the
Mm.
drugs then were probably doing a lot more harm than good. But he eventually went blind. He had dementia. He
Mm.
couldn't move out of bed. Like everything that could happen to you
Mm.
happened to him. And he also, like, our last vacation, we went to St. Croix, and he was actually pretty sick at the time. I think his T cell count was like one, which we shouldn't have been traveling. But unbeknownst to us, there's this microorganism that only lives in the sand in
Mhm.
St. Croix. But this microorganism, for a healthy person, it's nothing. But for an unhealthy person with no immune system, if it gets in your system, it literally like eats away all your
Okay.
internal organs one by one. It's like the name is like
Mhm.
long, but unfortunately he contracted it, and so it was actually slowly eating him away. But I used to pray that he would go without any pain because we've seen so many people die in hospital beds
Mhm.
that year, like in utter pain. So I was just praying for a peaceful death. But the funny thing, that microorganism, the first thing it attacked on him was his nervous system. So even though he was like a total skeleton, like he felt no pain
Mm.
whatsoever. And he died like a very, very nice death. And just to backtrack a little, to make God made things so much easier on me. He came to faith while he was in the
Mhm.
hospital that
Yeah.
first time. It's kind of a crazy story. I had a youth group leader back in the day. The youth group was called High BA. We're high school born
Mhm.
againers. Like squad. That wouldn't really work in the year
Mhm.
2025, I don't think. But that youth leader always said that if anybody was seriously looking for God or faith, that God would reveal himself in the
Mhm.
book of John. So in my simple head, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just bring him a Bible and mark the book of John. You can read it while he's in the hospital. I have no Bible. You could like wait for Amazon. So like I couldn't just rent out and buy a Bible. But thank God my dad was a Gideon. He would go
Oh
find
yeah.
people to leave Bibles
Mhm.
everywhere they go. So he must have snuck one in my apartment when I wasn't looking. So I found it and I brought it to my partner when he was in the hospital. I said, listen, if you're feeling up to it, if you want to read this passage, John. And literally a couple of days later, I go into the hospital room and his phone was ringing. And he looked at me and he says, tell whoever it is that you're my brother. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, no, tell whoever it is you're my brother. And he repeated it 3 times. And then he puts a little smirk on
Mhm.
his face. And then he says, tell whoever it is that you're my brother in Christ. It's
Mm.
like, dang, that book of John James really works. I'm wearing with such a godsend because it made life so much easier. Let's
Mhm.
just say the physical stuff is hard, but the spiritual and mental stuff was much much better. But they like literally. So he's in the hospital. I come, he comes to faith. I come back to faith. So this is going to sound so strange, but like for the first time in like 13 years, like I wanted to worship with other
Mhm.
Christians. That sounds so
Mm.
funny, but like I really wanted it. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, where the heck am I going to go to church? Because my parents were very good in exposing all the kids to like every form of evangelical Christianity. So we went to the Brethren Church, the Salvation Army, the Presbyterian Church until they went liberal, um, the Evangelical Free Church, and the local Baptist Church. So we had a
Mhm.
well-rounded like view of Christianity at that time. But I'm like, okay, I've been to so many churches in New Jersey. I am not going to any of them. This is not going to work out. So I found an organization. I don't even know how I found it. It must have been online when online was just first coming up. And I called them up and I was like, listen, here's the deal. Like, I'm gay, just came back to faith. I have a partner who came to faith, but he's dying in the hospital. Like, we need a place to worship. Can you give me one? His woman was actually in California. And she's going down this list of churches one by one. And I'm like, yeah. I said, no Jersey churches. Give me New York churches, New York churches only. So she gets down to, I don't know if I should say the church, but it doesn't matter. So I get down to, and she's like, oh, there's a new church that just opened. She goes, it might be a good fit. It's on Park Avenue in 86th Street. And I'm like, oh, I've been to lots of parties on Park Avenue. Like, this sounds like a good fit for a church. I was still a little carnal in my thinking, what the heck? So literally, I go to the church that Sunday. And mind you, it was only a couple months old. And they announced their first ministry. And the ministry was for Christians dealing with AIDS. And I'm like, I saw this like beam of heaven come down. Like, okay, Ron, this is the church for you. So that was very good.
Wow.
So yeah, it was you know what? I cannot complain to God about anything because He's been so freaking good to me. So, but during that time too, like. They spawned off a sister church in the village, which is all basically artists, single people, when I say single, primarily gay, single Christians, a lot of NYU students and some homeschoolers. So that was a very interesting mix of people. And like, it's so funny because like, with side B, we talk about our chosen families, like it's almost like a relatively new thing. But I remember in that little dinky church, those families there who had kids, they were all transplanted from other places in the country because New York is a very transient city. Nobody stays for a very long time. And usually you don't have any relatives if you're trying to raise a family. But they were so shrewd because they got all the gay single folk in the church and made them all godparents to their kids, which was like, it was like brilliant. It was like this win-win situation for everyone because they needed people to babysit. I mean, babysit, let them go out on dates at night, the parents. But then, as a Christian, basically celibate Christian, like who are you going to show your love to, right? Isn't that one of our major issues? But then you got an instant family, and it was wonderful. And I remember like the first home group I went to, this is before the chosen family came in. It was like in downtown Jersey City. And I remember it was like this 5-story walk up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I barely made it up to the 5th floor because there was no elevator. But I get to the door and the little creature on all fours comes walking out of the door. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Like I go to the church in the village. Everybody is, either gay or ex-gay person. Like, what is it? And then I go in, I stepped over this thing. And everybody was like a young couple with newborns. And I was like, Jesus, you have me in the wrong place. Like, how could you screw this up? Like, I need single people in my life. But I grew up in a house with a lot of foster kids. So I had like a little, I had my stuff with aversion to children because I just was around them so much. But God was funny. So I got to be really close to these families. They were so cool. And then I became the godfather of that little creature who came walking to greet me. He's like 35 now. He has a huge family of his own. But, the little unexpected things that I didn't know I needed at all. But God knew I had to direct my love in some way, shape, or form. So He provided a family and a godson at that time. And that was many, many years ago. And at that time, too, we're talking early 90s. Like the ex-gay movement was in high gear, at least in New York. On the bright side of that, I would say there's a good side to everything. The New York church I was going to realized that there were a lot of gay folk in their midst. So they provided a lot of counseling for us. Mind you, it was mostly all ex-gay counseling. But the thing that the thing, here's the positive side of the ex-gay movement at that time. Number one, it was like the first time, like in evangelical Christendom, as far as I'm aware, or at least my experiences, that we were
Mm.
actually seen as
Mhm.
people in the church.
Yeah.
So that was a huge plus. And also, they provided counseling. A lot of it was, at least initially, reparative therapy, which was like a big no-no in the
Mhm.
B world. But there were a lot of positive things that came out of that reparative therapy. None of it was
Sure.
becoming straight.
Yeah.
Just get that out. But a lot of it was dealing with issues in your life when you were growing up, like dealing like the healing issues, like healing from bullying, healing, relationships with
Mhm.
your parents, which was very good because it addressed issues. But of course, in their mindset, it was you're addressing these issues because the end game is for you to be heterosexual and have a
Mhm.
family, which didn't
Yeah.
quite happen.
Yeah.
Didn't quite happen. But then too, I mean, you ask questions
Sure.
like,
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
one,
sorry.
I want to hit a question about that. You're saying the first time that the gay community was actually seen, because it's like, oh, there's ex-gay, like you can name it. And
Yes, you can name
and
it.
the difference of what we call side Y, where people are like, oh, let's just not talk about our sexual orientation. Let's not name it. I guess I don't know if you have any experience with that directly or just thoughts around what the difference in feeling welcome in a church that even if it's ex-gay, like there's
Mhm.
recognition and you can be honest
Yeah.
about that part of your experience, and just how, do you have experiences that contrast with that?
Mm.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the one thing good about going to a small church, they did have ex-gay ministry, and they didn't just have one; they had like
Oh, wow.
4 different ones.
Mhm.
There were a lot of us.
Mhm.
We needed help. We all knew where we were going on Wednesday. We're going to be on Madison Avenue in the counseling center, but it was kind of like almost like a running joke in a good way. So, like everybody knew we had issues, everybody knew what the issues were, but they were trying to help us. So that was a big positive. And the one thing too about the ex-gay movement, or quote unquote being ex-gay in a denomination that leans in that direction, is like you're not barred from
Mhm.
ministry. So like I'm headed up a ministry in the city. Actually, it was a ministry to people with AIDS in New York and New Jersey, and then also was an ordained deacon, which of course the denomination, I mean, now they would not do that any longer. So when I went for membership recently, I was like, I had to pull that, like, I'm from your founding church and I'm
Mhm.
ordained by them. And according to like these rules, it's ordination for life. So you cannot bar me. I was half
Yeah.
kidding, but not really. Sometimes you have to get that
Mhm.
point in,
Mhm.
like, but right after, like, I think it was probably in the late 90s, things started
Okay.
to shift as far as, we'll just say, gay folk in the evangelical church, or at least from what I saw. And like the Y movement started coming in and big. And I think a lot had to do with the political environment at the time, because gay rights were really on the forefront, especially after the AIDS pandemic and fighting for those rights. And then I think it hyperinflated like gay rights, especially in the city. So I think churches, it became like this us them mentality all of a sudden, like us Christians, you gave and you
Yeah,
couldn't have
sure.
both, Yeah, and it was a little bit tough because I remember like somebody asked me once, well, Ron, are you gay or are you a Christian? And oh my gosh, I feel like a knife was going through my chest, because that's like the ex-gay,
Yeah.
conundrum, like if you're not cured, you can't be following Christ to the extent that, we think you should be. So then I think it made a difference too. Unfortunately, I moved further into New Jersey, so I really couldn't go to the city for church anymore. And I was attending a non-denomination church. And that was definitely side Y. Like, don't ask, don't tell to the nth degree. And so it's a little bit of a different time. And it was just kind of, I don't know, like they ignoring the issue, but like not being addressed. But let me tell you, like the churches that are strongly side Y, they have a big racket going. And I can get myself in a lot of trouble here. Because they know there's a certain population of their church that is gay or queer or whatever the labels are that you want to identify with. And they know, okay, these people aren't getting married, don't have any desire to get married. We're not going to push marriage. That was the big positive. The XK movement pushed marriage so much. In the Y movement, it wasn't even brought up. You know, it was just assumed, you know, don't ask us, you're going to be single for the rest of your life. But then that gave the church a lot of opportunity to use us a lot because they knew we had a lot more free time. And I mean, it's scriptural, you know, like
Sure.
you know, we're saying, like, we don't have family responsibilities. We should be serving the Lord, but it was almost to the abusive phase. Like, yeah, like at one time, like, because I was going to like a mega church and we opened up a campus close to my house. So I helped open up that church. And I still remember we had a new, I put it in quotes, campus pastor. And if anybody's been to a mega church with a campus, you know probably what I mean. But after 6 months of going to this church, like the pastor turns to me, mind you, I was doing the green room at this time, which meant I was at that church at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then literally to like late in the afternoon. And he car down, he says, Ron, like kind of condescendingly, like, Ron, so what do you do for this church? And I was so flabbergasted. I was like, do I punch him? Like, because I do what he does, because I see everything, and I know everybody in the whole crew here. So like I said, you know, I think we have to go get some coffee. So of course, he went out for coffee, and then I laid out my schedule and then compared it to his schedule. And I'm like, forget that I work a 40-hour job during the day. This is what I do for the church. Like every single day of the week, I was doing something for the church, either leading a home group, being a home group leader, running a ministry out of the church. And I said, I run a ministry out of your church you don't even know about. And you've been pastor here for 6 months. And I tallied up the hours and I said, okay, I work for this church 40 hours a week. I said, then let's see what you do. Like you come in on a Sunday, you do the intro, you introduce the worship band, you say, oh, this is going to be the greatest worship service ever. Video screen comes on, you disappear, then you come back and say, okay, let's pray, and that's the end of it. You know, and pretty much not much during the week either. So all that to say is they got a lot of use out of us, and I throw myself in the mix there. Like, you know what? Not their fault totally, because like we wanted to, because we have the free time, we love Jesus, want to serve the Lord. But then sometimes you go to another church and your eyes are opened a little bit, and you're like, oh wow, like I'm really being used a little bit here. Like there's no thank you. And I'm not a big thank you person. That's not my love language. But, you know, just a little acknowledgement, you know, like I'm serving a purpose in the body of Christ here, you know. But you know what's interesting at that same pastor too, he knew I was gay. I think that's why he kind of stayed away from me a little bit, even though we were stuck with each other like all days on Sundays. But one day during one of the worship services, it was like springtime right now. And we have a humongous cherry blossom park here. There's nothing more cherry blossoms here than in Japan, in this one park. So it's really beautiful. And so the pastor made mention of the cherry blossoms outside. Yeah, pretty innocuous. It's spring, you know, go enjoy the blossoms. But this one girl gets up and she leaves. And I quasi knew her, but not really. And so I was like, okay, something's up. So I follow her, and she's in the stairwell crying her eyes out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what the heck happened? So I was like, listen, you don't have to tell me anything, but you know, I can just sit with you if you want. And she goes, oh, please do. And this is where I think gay empathy comes in, which the church sometimes doesn't realize how important it is. But she then proceeded to tell me that last year when she was in the same park, she was gang raped in the middle of the day time. And so when she heard the words cherry blossom in a specific park, it just triggered her and she had nowhere to go. And all that to say is, you know, I think one thing gay Christians are good at is empathy, because we know hurt. You know, it could be a totally different hurt, but we understand it to some degree, because I think we've all dealt with it at some point, either from family, church. But again, that was like the don't ask, don't tell years too. Yeah, so it was a little bit more, I don't know, covert operations in the church.
Would you as you said, like, oh, the pastor knew I was gay, but did he ever name it?
No. It's like and the only main reason he knew was at the main campus many years prior, I gave a talk there. And so I'm sure the other pastors flew him in, and he just didn't want any part of it. Any part of the discussion. And at that point in my life, I was happily side Y. So I mean, it's like all my friends are straight, especially at church at this point. And like, it didn't really matter to me as much as when I first, came out with the church. It kind of like took a second seat, which now I'm kind of going back and putting it in the front.
Could I ask as well, were you also involved with sort of when the Side X movement was collapsing kind of, or becoming, or changing? Were you around that movement at that point?
No, but let me tell you, it is kind of funny. So this church in downtown Los Angeles reached out to me because they knew a little bit of my backstory with the AIDS ministry in New York. And they said, like, Ron, we're doing like a whole series like for Pride Week in LA. Like, so each Sunday they're going to have a different, Christian dealing with either queer, trans, or gender issues, but still affirming to Christian orthodoxy. And so he called me up for information, and I've been out of the loop so long. He's saying these words, I have no idea what they mean. Like the whole like cisgender, pan, like the whole 9 yards. He's talking to me. I'm like, go my phone. And I'm like, oh, this is so out of my league right now. And so I said, listen, I'll get some resources to you and get back to you. So stupid me has no idea about Exodus International. So I go to their Exodus International bookstore, like I always did. And the page comes up, no longer exists. And I'm like, okay, it totally took me by surprise. I'm like, what the heck happens here? So like, I just started Googling all the leaders who wanted to make us straight in the name of Jesus. And like, okay, 9 out of the 10 of those leaders are married, but they're not married to
they're all side A.
We all know. They're all side A. Not all, but 90% of them. Yeah, so it was kind of a shock for my system. And I was like, oh, what the heck was on here? I just wasn't paying attention. So then actually a good friend of mine who I was in a youth group with many years ago, she actually taught in Indonesia, and her kids actually knew this young kid who wrote a book. She goes, Ron, I think you'd really like this book. And it was Greg Cole's Being a Gay Christian. Like, it's so bizarre, like last from my high school, meeting my present world. And so I read this book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it was just so freeing that it didn't have like all the world's answers, right? Which I really appreciated. But the gut-wrench honesty of like a young kid, like dealing with the sexuality, vowing to remain celibate, and not knowing where God's going to lead him, like struck such a chord within me. So then I started hearing about side B, and Revoice first, then side B. I used to speak to what's called Reform University Fellowship. It's the PCA's college ministry, which, I mean, they have them up north now, but at that time it was primarily down south. And the youth leaders would take their southern, nice little white Christian people and bring them up to New York and have them sit down with me, where I'd give them like a real life situation about being a Christian in New York City, dealing with gay crap and, also an AIDS ministry. So I would kind of like blow their like perceptions of what Christians should be and how they should be dealing with people maybe not exactly like themselves in the name of Jesus, So that's pretty good. But a couple of them, the pastors from the South, it's so interesting, would say, oh, Ron, are you involved with, Revoice or side B? And I've been out of the PCA for a while, so like I didn't know what they were talking about. So I'm like, no. And meanwhile, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, it must be like a Southern PCA thing. Kind of humorous in retrospect, because there was a Southern pastor telling me about it, and they're like, we think you should really get involved in this. I'm like, oh, okay. So then we started doing research, and I'm like, I don't know, because like I'm so entrenched with like being X for a while, longer inside Y. So I'm like identifying as a gay Christian. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to work. It was a new concept to me. So it was a little odd, but these pastors were insisting that I would really enjoy a Revoice. I'm like, okay. So I booked a flight to their conference that was in Dallas. Were you guys there by any
Frank
chance?
was, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It was, oh, okay. It was in like that mega church with the kiddie slide going down.
What
Yeah,
are you
well, the
talking
church-
about?
I
What are you
wanted to
talking
die.
Yes.
Like McDonald's Playland.
It was like a McDonald's
Okay.
Playhouse.
I wasn't used to that in a church. Not, I mean, hey, great for kids, but who love Jesus, I don't know. But anyway, so I go. I know no one in this entire place, and I walk in, and the first thing that occurs to me, like you guys brought up, was like, oh my gosh, everybody is so freaking young. Like literally, they were like young kids. And I felt so out of place. I really did. And I'm thinking, do I stay or do I turn around and go? But there were some beautiful things that happened. Number one, like just hearing like all these LGBT voices singing "It Is Well With My Soul," I was like, okay, Jesus, I may not have too much in common with these, but like I am here. But what was interesting too, like it was one of the last nights. There was an older gentleman who was leaving, and he stopped me in the lobby. And we were kind of the same age. And he says, like, we don't have much in common with these people, do we? And I was like, yeah, no, not really, except for the gays. Like, except for the obvious. And he just looked at me, and he said, how many people have you lost? And I was like, oh. I said, I lost my partner and most of my friends all in the same year. And he says, yeah, me too. He goes, these kids, God bless them, they have no clue what we went through. And I said, and they are so better off for it, you know? But it was such a cultural difference. And then two, okay, I'm going to be so honest here. It's going to be embarrassing. I think it was the second year. It was in St. Louis. In like, okay, everybody's like wearing the guys, not the girls. They're wearing their crop tops and they're like short shorts or whatever. And I made mention to speak out of it, like, wow, this is a little bit different for like a church group, you know, because I'm so used to at this point, you know, straight and narrow Christianity. Okay, this kid came over my townhouse once. He goes to my photo album, right? He goes, Ron, he goes, you're the same age as those kids here. He goes, you're not only wearing a crop top, you're wearing a mesh top. And I was short and I was like, oh my gosh. It's just a cultural thing. I get it. So in my head, I'm like putting judgment on like the new breed of gay Christians, and I'm so glad he threw that back in my face, you know, because I was like, wow, that was so unfair, you know. Yeah. So yeah, so that was an interesting shock.
What made you become more involved
around.
as Revoice over time, even if it was a cultural shock at the beginning?
Yeah, you know what? The credibility of our buddy Art Vieira was, oddly enough, my worship leader at the church I was going to went to grammar school.
Random. Cool.
And so we had like this weird connection. And Art was so kind. I knew no one. And then on the last night of the first Revoice conference I went to, he goes like, oh, why don't you sit with the Jersey crew? Because like I have a whole crew from Jersey here. I'm like, oh, okay, this is great. You know, of course, the crew was even younger than the majority of the Revoice conference. But it was just so wonderful connecting with this group of people. And I laugh about it now because from there I said, okay, you know, let me invest myself in this community, even though I might feel like I'm a little bit of an outsider. But, you know, the overriding value is Jesus, right? You know, and then we also have our sexuality in common and not denying that we're not having any of these attractions or gender issues. So I decided, okay, I'll go to the Jersey Revoice group. And they were very welcoming, even at the dinner at Revoice and then going. And of course, New Jersey, we just do brunches, which is, okay, I am never going to turn down food on Saturday morning. But it was interesting on the way to that first meeting. I was a little nervous because I didn't know what to expect. But then I get to group, right? And it was like basically the same bunch of people, but then they go around to introduce themselves. Right? And this is so alien to me. So a person starts off with their name, but some of them didn't have the same names as when I met them at the Revoice conference like a month before. I'm like, okay, this is different. See that? And when some of the sexualities changed, so I'm like, that's in Revoice. And then they were using their genders and their pronouns. And I have never heard this stuff in my entire life. I'm like the old geezer in the room. I'm thinking, okay, so then they get to me, right? And I'm like, I'm just wrong. But it's been really wonderful. I've been going for a couple of years now. But the one thing I really like about at least the Jersey Revoice group, it's not a very homogenous group in any way, shape, or form. Like everyone comes from a wide range of Christian faiths. There's at least one very strong side A person in the group who is wonderful. I don't think we have any side Ys, though. We even have people who don't even like have a Christian faith. I mean, they're not the norm. I just like it that everybody can be so comfortable with each other, where like even non-Christians inside A folk who may not think theologically in the same framework that we do, still feel comfortable, still can voice opinion. I learn from them every week, you know. So it's been a real blessing. And half of them are all like shrink majors.
really?
Like I don't know what it is with Christian gay people. Look over that major. Time I go there, I'm like, they're talking this whole new vocabulary like every month. And I'm like, did you just take a class and you just learn these phrases? Because I never heard them before. None of your friends talk like this. But it's been a really cool learning experience. And just not keeping my Christian faith in a box, you know, if that makes any sense. So,
can I ask you, who are your parents in this whole journey? How are they engaging some of the topics?
Yeah, we have like the don't tell part. But let me tell you something. Like about 30, actually a little over 30 years ago, my dad had this major nervous breakdown. I mean, it was so bad. I had never seen my dad cry in my entire life. And he just cried for a month straight, like totally not functionable. And my poor mom went through hell dealing with him. And she would just write out like cards with Bible verses that you could just focus on, like the card with the verse on. And this went on for an entire month. And I don't know how he stopped, but he eventually came out of it on his own. Fast forward to last year, I reconnected with one of my foster sisters who I literally haven't seen in decades. And she just out of the blue says, you know, remember that time, like, you came out to your dad and he had the nervous breakdown because of it? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, start crying. I just felt terrible. Like, I couldn't believe that, like, and my father's a devout Christian, like, that he went through that because I came out to him. And even at that point, I came out to him and I was already back to faith at this point too. So like, but I think the years accumulating to that where he knew, you know, I was with a partner probably didn't help the situation. But that's one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent of side B too. I do not want any other Christian parents think it's their fault or their burden or something went wrong, you know, that how they raise their kids or any of that. Yeah, that's like a heavy burden to put on your parents where it really didn't have anything to do with like how my parents raised me or my relationship with my dad. Yeah, so that's really big with me.
I'm reading through Jay Stringer's book, Unwanted, and it's just interesting because it's about unwanted sexual behavior, and he goes into some of the like same topics that reparative therapies went into of like, what's your childhood wounds? What's, you know, these things deep in your heart? And I've just been in some ways conditioned to always associate it with that, but he's never, you know, it's not tied to like trying to make you straight or anything. It's not specifically about same-sex sexuality. It's like, oh, these things, as you said earlier, are helpful. But when it's in the context of like, and you made your kid gay.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh no. I mean, a lot of people blame, and there should be a lot of blame, but a lot of people blame the ex-gay movement for pushing reparative therapy a lot. Not to say, maybe because it was New York, we probably have the lightest version of it, because I've heard horror stories with the poor kids who've been decamped, and I mean, the whole 9 yards. I didn't go through any of that.
And this is maybe a hard question, but how do you evaluate having your partner in your life in the past? Like, how do you think about that now as a Christian? And I ask because a lot of people struggle with, like, it was good, and now there was bad things, but it was good, and like they have this complex view of it. So yeah, how do you process that?
Yeah, no, that's so interesting you should bring that up, because I understand the whole concept of celibate partnership. I get it, because once he was diagnosed, I mean, I'll be honest, part of the change in the way I looked at things was like, oh my gosh, like not having any more, I'm going to be blunt, sex, because I don't want to die. And then too, on top of that, there was like the whole coming back to Christ, and fully convicted that the sexual part of the relationship was like not honoring Christ. So there's that. But the overriding thing is like, I had to take care of my friend who was dying. And I still remember, like, I'm so glad you brought it up, because I remember going through my head at one point, like, I didn't know what love was, because I thought I knew what love was. And now it's like all messed up in my head. And then I just went to the scripture. I was like, okay, let me just be basic, which is like the best thing ever. So I went to scripture, looked up the love verses, and literally within like laying there, and I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And so I'm like, love is patient. Okay, yeah. Love is kind. Yeah. So I went down the whole list. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So this is what love looks like in a relationship, and I'm like, no problem. Look, I got this, So to me, it wasn't anything strange at that point. And what's interesting, when I used to talk to those college students from the South, when I would talk to their pastors afterwards and like the debriefing, they said that was the biggest impact that you had on these college kids, that you stayed by his side up until the day he died. Like, you didn't abandon him because, you're now like came back to Christ and can't have anything to do. Like, you were lovers, like, so like you have going on. And so so that's really interesting. And in my head, it didn't even occur to me to like leave him. But I'll say this, he gave me the out. He's like, listen, you're not negative, like, or you're not positive. You don't have to go through this. You can leave, And I'm like, this made no sense to me. Like, I'm not leaving now after 13 years.
Amen. Thank you.
It's not like, so that was never in question. Like 2 Revoices ago, the one in St. Louis, I had a breakout session there, and I basically just told the story of my life. But I poured out my heart. So like a total room of strangers, people I didn't know, I had no problem doing, right? Well, later that night, I was just going out to dinner with some guys from Revoice that I met. And one of them offered me a ride home. And of course, I'm in St. Louis. I have no idea where I am. But like, I'll take the ride back to the hotel, no problem. But going back to the hotel, he sat in his car and he started talking to me. He like poured out his entire life. Like it was crazy, amazing, because he's never told anybody before. And then like I was a little closed off, because like I'm one of those weird people. If you just spill your life out to me, I get shut down sometimes, so I'm like kind of shutting down in this process and feeling like a little bit of a jerk in the process. But then he asked, I won't say what it was, but he asked me a question about my life. And it just went right to my jugular. Like, in therapy a lot, no therapist has ever confronted me with this question. And I just broke down like a little baby and like cried for like an hour, kind of in his arms. But we've become quote unquote covenant friends. Like, he was in Missouri, so kind of hard to have like a covenant relationship if you're living with somebody, and he's married with 4 kids. But, God, like, it was kind of an eye-opening moment to me where God allowed me to, like, love another human being again, like, not in a sexual way, but in a way like, oh my gosh, I can be totally vulnerable. This person can be totally vulnerable with me, and I don't have to worry about anything. Like, he was a total safe space, and I was a total safe space for him. So it's kind of an eye opener where God was like, no, you can love another guy, Ron. There's perimeters around it, but it's okay. And it kind of like reawakened me emotionally to a lot more other things. So I was so closed off for such a long time, especially with, I still had a lot of ex-gay residue where literally, like, we had to sign a document, like in our first meeting that we had, where we weren't allowed to socialize with anyone else in the group. So like, okay, how we're right? So how am I isolated? Right? So it would kind of defeats the purpose, like we broke all those rules eventually. We couldn't have a leader though, But yeah, it was a different mindset, And then if you were going to have a close relationship with another person, they had to be your same sex and they had to be married, as like a little buffer, like, you needed that. I'm going to say sexual buffer, like you can't intrude on this date. But, that kind of backfired in the group because then half the group fell in love with their straight married because you weren't allowed to have anybody else, So, a little bit weird, but what can you do? Yeah. And I think what side B offers, which you guys are so well aware of, you have mixed orientation marriages, which is a choice. You have covenant friendships. You have your community, like you have David, like that you live with. Which, okay, these are things like I thought about, like maybe as a kid growing up, where I wasn't going to get married, but there were no other options. Without listening, since I heard your guys talk last year, Revoice, I was like, wow, there's actually communities out there that do this like in that, like a lot of, and I'm glad you guys, you're so honest about it too, that there's a lot of trial and error too. The whole thing of like community building, and you're not alone, which is amazing. And, Tita, you with your chosen family, right, with such a blessing to hear too, which you don't hear in like, many of us, you guys know, like Western Christianity, alien concept, you know that. But it's interesting too. Like I started going to a church closer to me here, very, we'll just say, conservative, traditional church. And the first time I went, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst church ever. It's just like so conservative. But it was multi-ethnic, which was really good. But then I just felt the Holy Spirit saying, go back, Ron, go back. Even though it's not your kind of church, just keep going back. So I did. And it's a PCA church too. And I went to one of those, like, intro to the church breakfasts where they put you on a table with like 3 other people, going for whatever to learn about the church. And they had like an elder plant at the table. And I've been around churches long enough, like, I know you're the plant guy. Trying to get the feel for what we're thinking. I get it. There's nothing wrong with it, and they're good at church good reconnaissance, right? Like, they were asking some pretty hardball questions, like that we had to ask each other in the group. So I just, came out and said, and I'm gay. He's like, and the guy next to me, he just by the shock looked at, well, first of all, the elder, like, wanted to die. So I should feel like piss his pants and leave the room. But the guy next to me, in all sincerity, he looked at me and he goes, well, if you're gay, what are you doing here? But he was like sincere about it. He wasn't being a jerk. And I was like, well, just because I'm gay doesn't mean I don't want to worship Jesus in a corporate setting, And so he never heard that before from like a person who's not heterosexual. But it's so funny. Now we're like best buds. Like, I'm good with this whole family. And even though the church is definitely not slide bean anyway, stretch of the imagination. In fact, hopefully the pastor will never hear this. But when I had my little talk with the pastor, he sent me like that 60-page document to the GCA on sexual, I forget what it's. I was like, I was like so defeated after reading that thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to press her on because the Holy Spirit telling me to stay here. But it's so interesting though. Like literally, like the last Revoice conference, Nate Collins at the end, I think it was like the last session. He's on stage. He's basically, I forget what he said, but it was like, be bold when you go back to your churches. Let them kind of know we're here. And part of the body of Christ, right? I think that. I mean, that's my big takeaway from him. But I'm like, oh, my church isn't quite one to do that with. But God is so funny. Like, so my flight got really delayed. So I didn't get home until like wee hours in the morning. And the next day was Sunday at church. And I always go to the really early service. So of course I didn't wake up on time. So now I'm at the later service. And I run into this family who know me from the first service. And they're like, John, like, what are you doing at the late service? And I'm like, I'm being generic. Right? I'm like, oh, like, my flight got in late. I'm like, oh, where'd you come from? I was like, oh, Columbus, Ohio. What the heck were you doing at Columbus? Oh, okay. I was like, I was at this Revoice conference. So like, oh, it's like this kind of like discipleship group for LGBTQ Christians who love Jesus, thinking the sexual ethics, of Christian Orthodoxy. And they're like, well, that's really amazing. What were you doing there? I'm like, well, I was kind of one of the great speakers. Like, what is that? It was so funny. And then once like one of their kids, by the way, asking the problem, where is actually really young, identifies with being more trans than anything else. So they're having like a little bit of, issues, shall we say, with growing up in this church. So that was like the first couple. Literally, right after I got speaking with them, the next couple, Ron, what are you doing here? Like, it's third service. So I go through the whole thing all over again. And we had a college-age student who was one of their sons. And so when I explained to him the whole Revoice thing, he turns around and he goes, yes. I'm like, oh, wow, that's the cultural difference between like a 22-year-old, and maybe the not so much 22-year-old. But again, too, like later that week, both parents contacted me that there's somebody in their extended family who's a Christian, but dealing with same-sex attraction, and she'd never met another Christian who gay-sex attraction, like there's always that divide, right? Either gay community or Christian community. So it was kind of an eye-opening. I'd given that pastor shit book to so many people at church. Like actually did it right, and it's helped so many people. So indebted to Bill for that book.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, you were talking about a Revoice a few years ago that there's just kind of been more some emotional openness coming out of the connection with, did you say a covenant brother or covenant friend?
Yeah, covenant friendship, yeah.
Yeah, and a covenant friendship of just how, like, he's in a different state and his family. Yeah. You have how long have you been at this church now?
2 years.
Oh, okay, 2 years.
Yeah, relatively new.
Okay.
Praying for church for a long time.
Yeah, how, I guess, I'm trying to think of what my question is. I think a lot of young people in general, side B people, maybe in certain specific ways, we want to be settled. We want to know who are our people. We want to know if we're going to be alone. And as you sit in your 60s, what word would you give to the listeners who might be in that boat of what should be expected from life ahead, year ahead? How can they hold that question?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And it may be a couple folds. Well, I think having a church, whether it's side B leaning or not, if there's a Christian environment that you can subscribe to, is extremely important. I'm not saying that's the most important thing. For me, is actually having a chosen family, even if the current one is, in the Midwest. Like I go out there all the time. In fact, I'll be out there in a couple of weeks because it's one of his son's birthdays, and they're like, "Oh, everyone has to come here for my birthday." Okay. But to me, that's actually the most important thing. And the really weird thing is, because he's married, has kids, his wife told me that, like, Ron, you have no idea. She goes, I've been praying for years that my husband could find an older gay Christian that, can, like, be friends with. I've, like, never heard of this prayer before in my entire life. Like, who thinks that way? So it's definitely a God thing. And we're, like, totally, I would say inseparable, but you know what I mean? So we'd have, like, kind of a covenant pact between us. And, of course, I'm much older than he is. So, like, I just made sure, like, financially when I go, like, just to make things real, he's part of my will and everything. So it's just not lip service, it has to mean something. Definitely. And I know that can't go the other way, and I'm totally fine with it, but I always tell him, like, I have the best deal ever. You got me, but I have you, your wife, and 4 kids, So I have the much better deal. And to me, there's such a healing in loving children, because I don't want to say the pure and innocent, but they're like pure and innocent. And just like his eldest son, last time I was out there, I'm sitting, he's like a big reader, and he's sitting there reading, and I'm sitting kind of next to him, and he just like outstretches his hand to hold mine while he's reading this book. And like my heart's melting. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I think that familial love, like, since I don't have an immediate family, goes a long way for me. And I know if you just say to have that, like, even with covenant friendships, like, it's hard because, like, a lot of people are lonely and they're looking for something, and that maybe when things go wrong, because the yearning is legit, but to be the right person, the right time, and it's usually when you're not looking for it that God provides it. Because then your motives are not, and your motives aren't better, which I think helps a lot. But for me, and I know it's really hard, I'm not saying it's easy, because, like, I've prayed and fasted for years, for a church, for a covenant family to be a part of. Again, Yeah, because my original one from the early days, they moved all over the world. So now, like, it comes at a point in my life because I'm retired, and my dad is still alive. He's 93, and he doesn't live that close. He lives like an hour and 45 minutes away. So I have to keep going down there, making sure he's okay. But I just really have to pray for discernment of what happens after he goes.
Well, thank you so much.
No, thanks you. I appreciate you guys so much.
We appreciate you having you on. We appreciate you sharing
Ron.
a history that a lot of us, people, and maybe who are a little bit younger, don't hear much, and kind of what it has meant for you to live a Christian life over the years.
Yeah, and I have to say, there is a tinge of envy for me with younger people, with Revoice. Because they get to be gay and a Christian.
I know, it's hard in some places.
Yeah, it's not very,
but it's less hard. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's true. That's
thank you, because we're building on the foundation of the work and lives of people like you. So you made it. You're part of making it possible for us to have the easier life than we might have had years ago. So we appreciate that, and we honor you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. No, thank you. And keep up your great work that you guys do. Like, seriously, it's blessed me a ton.
Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thanks. I've gleaned a lot of wisdom listening to you, so I appreciate it.
Wait, that means so much to me, because I listen to your podcast and I'm like, these people are so intelligent. And they ask the right questions, and your people you have on are like so well versed, and I'm like, I think I have the dumbest person on the planet.
Oh my goodness! No.
Seriously, that's I'm thinking. But anyway, I know we gotta go.
Thank you, Ron. This is a great time. Well, that's all. Bye. Folks.
If you like this podcast and want to see it continue, we have news. We are transitioning to Substack's paid subscription model. We will still keep our Patreon for existing members, but we're switching over to a simpler model for perks and payments on the Substack platform. Starting at $5 a month, you can ensure that this podcast continues, and you'll also get access to our subscriber-only WhatsApp group for new Kinship supporters. This podcast is fully supported by people like you who want to see it continue. And on that note, if you like the new Kinship podcast, one of the best ways you can support it is by sharing it with someone else who might like it. The more the merrier.